Just some quick announcements, nothing major. Very excited for it tonight. So just some quick updates. Again, we have our Slack channel. So it's been growing pretty quickly. So if you're not on it yet, please make sure to get on it. Experian is actually sponsoring an ngconf extended event. So I'm not part of organizing, but they contacted me. So you guys, free to take off for 2 days and attend ngconf extended. I luckily will be at ngconf, so you can. I'll be live tweeting and stuff. So if you want to do that, just feel free to follow me on Twitter. But that's it. So I just want to quickly introduce Rob Warmold. Sorry. He's a developer advocate at Google. Yeah, he's on the Angular team, and he's a Texan. So yeah. So that's all I got.
So just give me a second to get wired up into our super complicated system here. That's me. It's not what we want to see. Yes, success. Cool. All right. That's not what I want either. So thanks for having me for a start. This is actually a really nice place to come down and get a little bit of a break from Mountain View. So like Victor said, I'm Rob. I'm the developer advocate on the Angular team. As of last week, I would have said that I am the developer advocate. I am now one of 2 developer advocates on the Angular team. We hired one Monday he started, so there'll be 2 of us kind of roaming around the world. Angular's never really had a developer advocate before, and so my job is to spend 50% of my time doing engineering and code, and the other 50% of my time kind of coming up to meetups and talks and kind of public-facing thing, because the dirty secret is that nobody on the Angular team really likes doing this, and I kind of do, so they send me out into the world to do this. Guess question. So who in here is an Angular developer today? Pretty good chunk of you? Cool. Who's just a JavaScript developer? Anybody feel like you're in the wrong room and you have no idea what you're even here for? Okay, so that's good. Cool. So I prepared a whole slide deck on the way down here on the plane, and then I sort of got here and I realized that would be really dull to just watch me read off the slides for the next 45 minutes. So we're about to ship Angular 2. It's been a long time coming, 18 months or so. So I figured probably what I would do is just let's actually live code an app. You can kind of get a feel for how this works, how it all fits together, and I'll try to do a decent job at least explaining what I'm doing and what the pieces are and how they fit together. The other thing is if you have a question, just feel free to shout it out. I'm not going to be offended. So if something doesn't make sense or ask a question, whatever, that's totally cool with me. It won't throw me off, I hope. I say that, then I'll be totally confused, right? Let's see. I've got set up here just a really kind of simple starter app. This is not the thing I want. I'm not going to kind of go through setting up the tooling because that's really, really boring. So if you're an Angular dev today, how many people in this room use Gulp today? Grunt? Webpack? Cool, a few of you, right? So here's the kind of dirty secret that you need to know to start with, right? So if you're an Angular 1 dev and you use Gulp and you just kind of do this thing where you write an app and then you kind of concat everything together in a folder, right? That's pretty much not how it works anymore, right? So everything has kind of changed. And the biggest change you're going to see if you kind of look towards using Angular 2 or even just modern JavaScript is this idea of a module, right? So anybody used ES6 modules? If I say that, raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. A few of you, cool, right? So for a long time, JavaScript has modules, right? So we have CommonJS and Node, and we have AMD, and Angular has their own. I don't know why those lights are going off. That's purposeful. Cool. Angular has our own weird and wacky module format, right? And so in ES6 and TypeScript, finally, we have the idea, finally, of modules as part of the language. Everybody see my screen? Yeah? So the reason I'm talking about modules first is that what we're going to go through today is really using TypeScript, ES6, kind of modern JavaScript in the context of Angular 2. And the reason that we talk about tooling and all this stuff is a big kind of pain in the butt is really to do with modules. And so modules are awesome. I think they're probably like the most important change to JavaScript as an ecosystem. But there's this problem that like the people who kind of control JavaScript, and that's TC39, they invented modules. We have a syntax for modules, but they didn't actually get around to inventing the way to actually load these modules, right? So we have like a really awesome format. We have a really nice standard, but we don't actually have a way to use it yet, which is kind of tricky. So we have all this other tooling, and I'm using Webpack today, and I'll explain that a little bit. But the point is that the idea here is we're using like the future of JavaScript, the future of the way this is going to work, but we have to sort of use some extra stuff to make it work in the browser today. We have to use some sort of tooling to turn it into something the browser can run. And then really like the theory is at some point in the future, at some point like a couple of years from now, maybe all this tooling will go away. But I would say that like the thing you should probably just accept, if you like, is that you will probably be using tooling for the rest of your career as a JavaScript developer, right? And so some people I think that's maybe a bad thing. I think there's something to be said for the fact that you can just like start up an app, you can start up a browser and start writing JavaScript code, and that's great, right? But I think if you work for a company that's building applications, right, if you're building actual kind of large-scale applications, the benefits are really, really good. And so there's a payoff, but there is some pain. And I'm just going to kind of like hand wave all over the pain. Like I'm not going to even show you how it works really. Just know that what I'm doing, we'll get to the interesting bit here in a second, I am running Webpack, which is kind of like Gulp Advanced, if you like, right? And so what it's doing is it's going to, every time I make a change here, it's going to build my code. It's going to kind of package it into a bundle for me and just refresh my browser, right? So if you've used browser sync or anything like this, this is very similar. Webpack's doing kind of all this magical stuff for me. And I'll upload the project that I build today up onto my GitHub, so you can all pull it down and play with it if you want. But basically, like, in this case, we're going to use Webpack to kind of just smooth over all the annoying bits. And the other thing I should mention is that the other really nice thing that we're building is our sort of Angular CLI. So we have a tooling. Angular's never really given you kind of a recommendation on how to build your application. We've never given you a gulp task. Like, all that comes from the community, right? In Angular 2, we realized that this is way more complicated. There's a lot more you have to know. There's a lot more tooling. And so we're actually going to provide to you like a CLI, a command line tool that will actually do all the hard stuff for you. It will, it'll generate an app. It'll do the build. It will ship it to production. It'll deploy it for you if you want. So we're going to kind of make this really, really easy. That's not actually ready, and I actually broke it this morning, so I'm not going to use that today, and we're going to use Webpack instead. So, show of hands again, Angular developers, yes. Who knows, like, what's the way you start up an Angular app today, right? How do you do that? Use ng-app, right? That's gone, so say goodbye to that. And I'm actually going to delete this and cheat, right? So, who's a programmer in another language? Like, who speaks another language other than JavaScript? Good, cool, right? So, every other kind of main programming language in the world has this concept of a main file, right? And so what I have here is my main.ts. So I'm going to use TypeScript. I'm not going to kind of dive too deeply into TypeScript. I'm going to use it and kind of just ignore the fact that it exists. You'll see me use it, and like if you've used ES6 before, it's not that different. Again, like if something doesn't make sense when I'm using TypeScript, like ask a question, that's totally fine. I'll be happy to explain it to you. But this is effectively the main entry point to my application. So what I'm saying here is when I start up my app, you're going to execute this file first, and something's going to happen, right? You can see at the top here, this is an ES6 import. So what I'm saying is import some bit of code. So this is the bootstrap function from Angular, and I'm going to grab it from this location on disk. And this is kind of how we start the process, right? So when our app boots, it's going to execute this thing first. What I'm going to do is kind of leave this main file empty. We're going to start building an app. So I'm creating a new TS file here. And what I'm going to do is import components from Angular 2. So this is me saying, like, I just need some little bit of logic from the Angular module. This just comes off of npm Angular 2/core. And so again, what I've said is like I need this piece of thing, and then what I'm going to do is create a class, export class app, and I'm going to add a decorator. So I will explain what this means in just a second here. And what I'm going to do here is then go back to my main.ts. I'm going to go over to the file I just created and say import app from ./app. Hopefully. And then say bootstrap my app. And the danger of live coding is that I've already screwed up, and it's going to explode in my face when I do this, right? But let's see. App.ts. OK, so the way to read this is I have a main entry point file. I'm going to import the bootstrap function and then import my app that I just created and then say bootstrap it, right? So like launch it in Angular. The other thing to show you is this is an index.html. Everybody's written one of these before. And I have the Angular 2 polyfills file, and I have this little demo app thing here, right? So an Angular 2 app, unlike an Angular 1 app, basically everything is a component. We have this idea, instead of having like directives and controllers and templates and element directives and attribute directives, and there's like 14 ways to do everything in Angular, right? This is kind of a big complaint that everybody has with Angular 1. There are basically two things in Angular 2 you need to know. The first is components. Everything is a component, and everything that's not a component is a service, if you like, right? So those kind of two concepts should be pretty familiar to you. Anybody a React developer in here? It's OK. You can raise your hand if you've done React. It's fine. You're not going to get in trouble. Cool. So like React has had this concept of components for a long time. Like Ember has them. We've kind of finally caught up and gone, yeah, OK, actually maybe this is a good idea, right? Components make sense to everybody. And so what I call a component here is what you, if you've done Angular 1 apps, is kind of alternately known as an element directive, right? So it's a directive you've created. It's that restrict E, and it's got a template and a controller, right? So you can kind of think about like that's what a component is. And so a component in an Angular app has a selector, and that matches demo app. And so that's the tag, right? And again, first thing to notice is instead of that weird syntax we had in Angular 1 where it was like camel case and you do the thing and you inevitably forget that it's camel case and it's wrong or whatever, right? So this is just normal. It's demo-app. Good, right? And then it comes with a template property. If I could type a template property. And so a template here, this is handy. You can do template URL just like you do in Angular, or you can do template inline. Because we're in ES6 or TypeScript here, I can do multi-line string. So the thing to notice is that this is a backtick right here, not a regular quotation mark. And the nice thing about this is I can do multi-line strings without doing like line plus line plus line plus line, right? Which is nice. So I'm going to go in here and just say like hello name. So we'll do the hello world of Angular apps. This should be pretty familiar again. If you're an Angular 1 dev, this looks pretty kind of normal. This is where it gets a little weird. So I'm going to do name is a string. And so what I'm saying here is my app class has a type, a property of type string called name. And then in a constructor, I'm going to say this.name is, what's the name of this officially group? It's AngularJS OC? OC? Yeah. So does this look kind of normal to everybody so far? Does this look relatively straightforward, right? So again, think of this as an element directive. It's got a selector. It's got a template. And then this is, your kind of handy-dandy double curly brace Angular syntax. Everybody's comfortable with this? And what we're saying is name here matches with name here, and I'm assigning some value to it. And you can note here I'm not doing like scope.name, right? Like scope is gone. Goodbye scope. Everybody can wave goodbye to scope. If you've been doing controller as probably in Angular 1, if you've kind of done this before, then this is kind of how controller as works, except that like controller as is the default, and you no longer need to say as whatever. So just assigning to this makes it available to the template. And then we'll do some really high-tech logic here and say like after a second, we'll change this.name to AngularJS OC and a whole bunch of exclamation points, right? I'm watching this screen and it's like half a second behind what I'm actually typing here, so I should stop doing that probably. But let's see. So we got main in there. I don't know why that's complaining. Cannot find module./that. Let's try that again. It always goes terribly wrong to start. Let's see what happens. It's not complaining. So just notice like as I'm saving there, Webpack is rebuilding in the background. And hopefully if I open this up in my browser, oh my God, it works. Yes. So that's like we're done, right? It was easy. Build an Angular app. Cool. So let's go back to this. So like this isn't obviously very interesting, right? But this is kind of how you've done. Everybody starts building an Angular app this way, and so we'll build it. So who remembers, like bonus points if you can tell me, like how do I assign a event on a click in Angular 1? Like what do I do? If I want to do something when I click a button, what do you do? And you click, right, cool. So good news for you, all those things are gone. And I'm going to joke about this, but I guess the thing that I should make is that, the point that I should make, and somebody wrote a really good blog post about this the other day, is that when we announced all this, like you've probably seen the presentation if you follow Angular, where like a bunch of people from the core team went on stage and like they did that thing with tombstones, and they were like, all that stuff you know and love, like we killed it, right? It's all gone. And we thought it was really funny, except that like what they didn't really pick up on is that like all of you guys make money doing this stuff, right? Like this is your job. And they had this moment, they were like, oh crap, right? Like there's a bunch of people who are really pissed off about this because like you all know how to do this for a living, right? So the thing I want to get across more than anything else in this demo is that if you're an Angular developer already, like you already know how to use Angular 2. Conceptually, it's very much the same, right? Like stuff works the same. You have DI and all this stuff that you're used to, except that it's way, way easier. And a lot of the stuff like disappears. You don't have to remember all these weird like Angular specific things, right? A lot of it just goes away. So this is the same, right? Hooray, we know that that works the same. Now, clicks, right? So clicks are like a standard thing. They're from the browser. That's not something an Angular invented, right? And instead of having like ng-click, which is, again, like it's a weird Angular thing, we just can use click, right? It's a button event. And so what we can do, this is the first bit of wacky syntax that you need to remember. And I guess the point is that like what I'm going to show you here is there are really only two things you need to know, and this is the first one. So let's say that I want to change the name when I click. Right, and so we'll say change here. And so the way you read this is the click event. Again, this is not ng-click or like Angular click or anything. This is just the click event that a regular DOM event gives you, right? And then the parentheses syntax here around that basically says like listen to the click event. And you can think of it, and this is the way I think of it, is like when well, it's like an event listener, right? So it's like think of that like calling a function. And that's kind of any DOM event. So click, drag, like click and drag are the two I can think of right now. But like click and drag, right? They're button events. They're just normal events. And so we're just going to say like when the click event happens, do a thing. And I'm going to go back to my class here. I'm going to add a method, change name. And you can see like already I'm getting auto completion here, which is really nice. So I don't have to stumble around typing green. And so instead of using the set timeout here, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to do this. So again, like when I click, call the method, call it change name, and that's going to execute this, and it's going to do a thing, right? That makes sense to everybody so far? Yeah, cool. Again, raise your hand if it doesn't. Not a big deal. So we got a really high-tech app, and hopefully we're going to click, and it's going to change, right? Applaud. Good. Yeah, cool. Cool. So that's ng whatever, right? So ng click, ng like all these other things, they're gone. They're all disappeared, right? So you can think about anything that's going to come from the view to my class, to my controller, is going to be a parentheses, right? Cool. And then what's the other one, right? So like ng hide, right? Ng show, ng if. Well, ng if we'll come back to, but ng hide, right? Or ng disabled, let's say. That's a good one to do. So we have ng disabled, right? That used to look like this in Angular 1. You do ng disabled something. Here's a secret, though. Like buttons already have a disabled property, right? This is not something that has to come from Angular. This is something that already exists in the browser. So how do we do that? If parentheses are going in from the view to the controller, how do we go like from the controller out to the view? So surprise, looks like this. So disabled. Okay? So that's like weird, wacky syntax 2 you need to know. And so we'll build like the worst app here and say like disable button. Right. And I'll take, and so I'm going to add a new property here. And so like we'll say is disabled, and that's a Boolean. And little trick there, I can actually do an assignment right here, and I can say false. And then I will say like this dot is disabled. Now my autocomplete stopped working, so that's awesome. Disabled is true. And so again, like when I call the click method here, call the disable button method, and we're going to set this is disabled property to true, and that is going to be bound to is disabled. There's my autocomplete back, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, cool. And hopefully now, let's just make sure that that ran, yep. And you'll notice that like if I do something stupid, this will show up as like a bunch of really red text. So if you see that happen, yell at me, because it's not going to work, right? And that's actually one of the really nice things about tooling in TypeScript here is that like I know ahead of time, most of the time, if this is going to work, right? It'll say this doesn't work. And I'll show you like what that looks like when I screw up at least once today. So cool, right? Hit the button, change. Now your app doesn't do everything. You probably fire your QA team if you actually ship this, right? But there you go. It's a thing. So again, call the method. We're going to use the native disabled property. All right? Does that make sense so far, everybody? So again, like this is stuff you've done before. This is ng-click. This is ng-disabled, except that we're using the native events and the native properties from the button elements. Okay? Correct. Yeah. So what I'm saying here is like this is the native DOM disabled property. This is my is disabled from the from the class itself. And again, if you've done Angular 1 dev, there is this weird kind of logical process you have to go through that like, okay, am I going to use double curly braces? Is it something that's angular? Is it interpolation? Is it an expression? Is it like one of 4 different options? Which is it? I don't remember. Like, do I use curly braces here? Do I not use curly braces here? That's really hard to remember, right? What's nice is that instead of like thinking about what's on the right side of the little template syntax thing here, right? So like, notice I'm not doing curly braces here, because the brackets and the parentheses are telling me on that side of the thing, this is Angular doing its thing, right? And if I were to do disabled true like this is Angular is not involved at all, right? This is just like regular DOM attribute property syntax. And so the brackets and the parentheses here really give you an indicator like this is Angular doing something, right? And you don't really have to think about too much about what's on the right side of the thing. And I think for a lot of people that really simplifies the really like, and I still do it when I do Angular 1 apps. I was helping somebody out in the office yesterday with an Angular 1 app, and they go back to the docs and be like, I don't remember which one this is, and how do I do it? And you refresh your browser 4 times until you finally get the right one. Like most of that disappears now, okay? So this is pretty much Angular 1 like 101, right? Angular 2 101. That's what this is. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with this so far? Yeah, good? Groovy, cool. So now, if an Angular app is made out of components, right? So again, the first thing to notice is like this is not anything special. This is just a component. It's just a regular Angular component. It doesn't say like app component or root component or like bootstrap component. It's just a component, right? And so an Angular app, like top to bottom, is composed of components. So let's say we wanted to get a little bit interesting. Let's build something like a name tag component, for example. So I'm going to grab my component and cheat here. So again, I'm importing the Angular component here. And I'm going to create a new class, like export class name tag. And I'm going to attach my components. And so I'll explain this now. So this little weird, wacky @ syntax, which looks really strange if you're a JavaScript developer, this is called a decorator. And really what it does is decorate the class, right? So instead of doing angular.module, .whatever, .directive, and then like that weird directive definition object, again, you have to look up in the docs every time because there's like 14 different properties, right? Nah. So really the way to read this is like the component is the class. This is your controller, if you like. And then all this component decorator does is like attach a little bit of extra metadata, right? And so you can think about like everything kind of here is Angular, and everything sort of here is like just regular JavaScript or TypeScript, right? Like that's a very clear separation between like what's just code and what's Angular's kind of addition to this code, right? And so like theoretically, if you wanted to, I don't know, like switch to React a year from now, don't do that, but you could. Like you could just remove the component decorator, right? And all that code is just then like regular vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript, okay? And so I'm going to create my selector. I'll call this like name tag. And we'll do a template again. And we'll say div. So we've already seen this before, like hello, my name is name. And we'll add that name as a string. And so that's a component, very simple, right? I'll go back to my app. And I'm going to go to import from /name tag. It's not complaining that time, which is good. So here's the first really nice thing about TypeScript. Like I've already forgotten what I called the class in the other file. Come on. So I'll go back and actually look and see. So never mind my tooling. I called it name tag. Duh. That'll show up. No one. Name tag. And I should say that like I'm using the sort of hyper alpha edge versions of everything up here, which is never a good idea, but there we go. So again, I've created a component in my name tag file. I'm going to my app file, and I'm importing it to make available to my other thing, right? Now, this is the thing that's going to make all of you mad, and I'm sorry, but this is the way it is, right? So I just told you that everything in Angular 2 is a component, right? Not true, actually, sorry. Everything in Angular 2 is actually a directive. Oh my god, what? Directives. And so, and we'll build a directive in a minute here, but a directive, right, is just some bit of UI. A component is just like a superset of directive, right? So everything's a directive. All components are directives, but not all directives are components. Really what this means is that like a component is a directive with a template. Hey, just like Angular 1, right, restrict E, that's an element directive. So a component is a directive with a template. And so basically, like, if I want to use a directive or a component in another component, I need to tell that component about it, right? Like, I need to make it available. And so all I'm doing here is, like, we have this directives array. And I'm just going to say, I want to use my name tag directive inside of this component. And it just, like, makes it available, okay? And then I can go in here and say, oops, name dash tag. And I can just use the directive, okay? So hopefully now, let's see. Hello, my name is blank. Good, right? Cool. So what's important about it, like, is once it just becomes a directive or a component, once it becomes a component, you can use it just like any other native DOM element, right? So it's like a button or an input or whatever. But what if I told you that I wanted to use, like I wanted to pass in a name to this, right? Like a component that doesn't have any kind of communication with the outside world is not very interesting, right? Like it's not very useful, it's not very reusable. So if I had a name tag, I'd want to be able to do something like name. And let's just, to make this a little bit clearer, I'm gonna call this my name and my name, right? And so I wanted to have like a name property on my thing, right? Just like I have disabled or whatever on a regular component, on a regular DOM element, like an input or a button. I want to use the same syntax, right? Like I don't want you to have to learn something different to use this in Angular 2. And so we can do that, except if I do this, I expect that probably this will not do anything useful. It doesn't. You can see, obviously, we're not getting any information here, right? So what we need to do is just like a DOM element has an API, and if you go to like MDN button, you can go to the MDN docs, and this is Mozilla Developer Now, where you can read like what's all the stuff that's available on a button, right? So you've got like disable, all these things that are documented, right? There's an API that exists for button you can go and look up and read. So what we need able to do is actually go to our name tag and declare an API, right? Like we need to tell it how it's going to communicate with the outside world. And so a button or any component has kind of two things, and I've already really said them. They have inputs, and that is like things that you as the user are going to do to the button, right? And then outputs, and that's like stuff that's going to be emitted to the outside world, right? So like inputs in this case, an input to our component is the name, right? It's coming from the outside world. And then we might have a button that does like change or save or whatever, and it emits stuff out of the button. This is a little bit weird, so this would be a good place if this doesn't make sense to like raise your hand and go, what the hell are you talking about, right? Everybody okay with me so far? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a thing called input. And so input is another decorator. And what I can actually say here, instead of passing it in like this, I can say at input name is a string. And so what I'm doing here is effectively declaring the public API of the component. I am telling this class, telling Angular, hey, this is a property that's going to come in from the outside world, something that's going to come in from above. Make sense? Nod your head if it does, shake your head if it doesn't. No? Yes? No? Not many moving heads out there. Okay. Let's save that. Let's see if this works. Ha, it does, right? Cool. So just to step through this again so it's clear, right? So this name property is like internal to the component. And again, like Angular 1, we've all dealt with scope inheritance probably, right? You have scopes, inherit from scopes, inherit from scopes, inherit from scopes. And you get these situations where like you have a component and it depends on something way above it, and then you change that component and it all breaks and everything's terrible, right? And also like it doesn't explode, right? Like your app just quietly fails until it goes to production, and then you're like, oh God, we have to ship another build of this, right? It's bad. And so there's no such thing as scope inheritance, right? Now a component is very isolated. It only gets from the outside world what you explicitly tell Angular this stuff is available, right? So this input name that I have declared here becomes available inside of the class as name, and then when I use it in my app here, it's name, right? So this maps to this, maps to this. Everybody okay with that? Yeah? Cool. And then if I go, like I'm going to remove my stupid disable button method. We'll go back in here, but our set timeout back in here. I'm gonna look really dumb if this doesn't work, right? So again, do that thing where I'd like set a property, and then hopefully after a second it will change. Yes, it does. Groovy, cool. So again, like the point of this is that this is Angular component, right? But you can treat it just like it's any other DOM element. It's not special at this point. It's just like a regular DOM element, okay? And so, yeah.
What if you wanted to pass a string as opposed to my name? Just a string, my name.
Gotcha. So like if I wanted to do this, I think that works. Let's see if it does. Yeah, it does. Good. It's hard sometimes. So does that make sense, everybody? We call this an input. You can think of it as a property binding or whatever. It's an input. And like in an Angular 1 app, if you had a directive, it would look something like, I don't even remember what it is. It's like function, a type function, right? Return the object, then it's like scope, and then it's like name, and it would look something like this generally, right? Is this vaguely familiar? Is that right? Ish? Yeah? I don't know. Looks like that anyway. But this is, again, like scope in this context declares an API. It says like this is the stuff that's going to come from the outside world. Same exact thing in Angular 2. So again, this is like that thing where you kind of already know how this works. You kind of already know what it does, but you just have to learn the syntax for how it works, right? And so we have a name tag there, great. That's still complaining, I don't know why, whatever. So this is my name tag. I'm going to leave this is because this is kind of normal, right? But then like let's say we want to have one more component, and I'll call it like name input, right? Well, let's go back and just cheat so you don't have to watch me do this line by line again. And we'll call this one name inputs. And so again, like not a really interesting component, but we're doing this for the sake of effect. So I'll have a text in here. And I'll do that. Jesus Christ, here we go. And we'll call this one name input. Actually, I'm going to call this name changer because input's going to really get confusing if I keep calling it input. So we'll call this like name changer, which is an awesome name. Name changer. Let's rename that because I will never get it wrong. Ruby. We don't need it in here, right? So we'll put a button in here. And again, I'm going to go back to my app component. I'm going to import my name changer from dot slash name changer. Note as well that I'm not using like .ts here. It's just kind of mapping automatically for me. And then again, I'm going to take that name changer, add it to the directives array, which again just says like I want to use this component inside of this other component. I'll explain why that is in a little while, kind of as we close to the end. And then I'm going to use it. And so again, I'm just going to name changer, name changer. And so our super high-tech app here, the idea is like we have two components. One of them allows you to change your name. The other one allows you to display the name. And then they kind of share this parent component, our app component. And this is very, very high-tech, right? So hopefully this works. Let's see. It does. Groovy. Go to my name changer. Say like placeholder change my name. Yeah, cool. So here's the first fun thing, right? And I forgot to do this, but this is something I want to point out to you because this, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And I think if you've done Angular for more than like a year, you're going to love it because you've done this before and it's awful, okay? So I've got a click event here, and I'm calling a save method, which doesn't actually exist, right? And so who knows what happens in an Angular app if you do this today, Angular 1? Nothing at all. Nothing goes wrong. It doesn't tell you this. You just sit there clicking the button, and you're like, what did I do wrong? And it's just because you didn't declare it, right? I do this. I go in here. It's going to throw a big, dirty error in here that's like, oh, my God, right? And you can see, oh, my gosh, save is not a function. Amazing, right? And so, again, like this is scary because you're like, oh, my God, it's a red error message. This is Angular. It's not supposed to complain like this, right? Which is nice, I guess. The first time you build an app and you're on stage like me and you want to screw up and not have it explode, fine. But like when you're building real apps, you want to know when it fails, right? Like you want to know when things go terribly wrong. And so Angular's going to tell you that now that, hey, stupid, you forgot to add that method. Cool. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to add my change. Oops, not change. Save. Thank you. And so here's the thing, right? I can do this. I'm going to just do like name is a string, and it's like user. And then I'm going to say this.name equals what? I don't know. So let's do this. Pass name through. And so, you know that video I was joking about earlier where like they had all the tombstones and it went dong and everybody got really mad? Who remembers when we said we're going to kill two-way data binding? Yeah, we said that, right? And again, if you're an Angular developer, you're like, you idiots, what are you doing, right? So we're going to get to that, but I'm not going to use ng model here just kind of on purpose because there's a bigger narrative I'm going through here that we'll get to, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here, which is kind of weird, is I'm going to do a hash here, and I'm going to say this is the name input. Okay? So this name input, you can read this kind of like var name input. Right? So what it means is basically like I want to get a reference to this name input, right? I just want to have this element, this actual element, available to me, right, in the view. And so it allows me to do stuff like this. And I can say, on my save method, I want to pass through the element itself, okay, to my save method, right? So again, name input is just like it's literally a reference to the input, and then I'm going to pass it through my save function method into my controller. This is actually the input element that comes through here then, right? I'm going to show you this for effect. Do input, so I'm going to console.log that out, input L, and then console.log the input L dot value. And so again, like dot value is not anything Angular specific. This is just like an input thing. Inputs have values. You can read them. It's fine. And go in here and say like Rob and save. And you'll see two things here, right? So the first, it's actually going to pass the element through, which is nice. And because Chrome is cool, if I hover over this, you can see it actually highlights the element on the DOM, right? So I'm actually passing through the actual DOM element, which again, if you're an Angular dev, is kind of like, but I thought we weren't supposed to touch the DOM as Angular developers, right? Like, okay, but that's fine. We're going to do it like this. And then I'm getting the value here, right? So Rob. And so I haven't done any ng model, I haven't done any two-way data binding or whatever, but here we go. And so all this allows me to do is actually get a reference to the elements. And so what I'm going to do here is say like div current name is name. And what I want to do is this dot name is input L dot, oops, not that, input L dot value. And then handy, I'm just going to do like input L dot value is blank. So I'm just going to reset the element again. Right? So again, nothing really angularly happening here. Just like I've just got an element, I'm messing with the regular element. So I want to show you here is that we've got the situation, okay, like I've got the like initial name here, and I can go in here and I can say change my name, and I can say Rob, right? And it changes there. But we're not telling the outside world about it, right? Like everything here is happening inside of this component. It's all scoped locally, right? And so what I need to do is tell the outside world, hey, something has changed, right? I've fired an event. So there's an output coming out of this component, right? So guess what that's going to look like from the outside world? You already know, okay? So instead of doing input, which was stuff coming into the component, we're going to do output, which is stuff going out of the component, okay? And we're also going to pull in this event emitter. And so event emitter is like, we need some mechanism to function, like we need something to call, we need something to execute this on, right? So event emitter lets us do that. And so this is a little bit stranger, and it is, sorry, but you'll get used to it, right? I have to say this a lot, but you'll get used to this, okay? So what I'm going to do is I want to say name changer, right? So like a button has a click event, right? My name changer element, my name changer component, let's say it has a change event, right? So we would want to, from the outside world, do something like change, right? Or name change, perhaps, right? So like, just like click on our button earlier, we have a name change event that's fired by the component that we can listen to in here and say, I don't know, update name. And that's going to take an event like every other thing does in Angular, right? And so what we'll say is update name takes the name, and this dot my name is name. So again, just like a button click, right? We have this event we're listening to that we want the component to emit, okay? And so how do we declare this? Same way. We do outputs, right? So it's a decorator. We're telling Angular about our component. Output. What did I call that? Name change? Yeah? Thank you. Name change. And then it is a new event emitter. So this is a little bit, again, this is a little bit strange, but effectively what I'm saying here is like I'm declaring this property that, or this event that Angular knows about, this output, and this event emitter will actually allow me to spit stuff out to the outside world. And so what I want is that when I click the save event here, right, I want to actually do this. Instead of saying this.name, actually I can say that, that's fine. I'm going to reset the text, but I want to say to the outside world, name change dot emit this dot name. Get it inside of there. And so this is going to fire that event to the outside world, emit this new property, emit the thing that's just happened, right? So again, just to step through this, I have an input box. I've got a reference to it here. I'm going to pass that through to my save event. I'm going to grab the value out of it. I'm going to assign it to this dot name. I'm going to reset the box, the input box. And I'm going to emit that value. Oops, this dot name change dot emit. I'm going to emit this value to the outside world. Everybody okay with this so far? It's a little bit strange, but we'll get there. And then again, this is that same thing. So name change here maps to name change here. And when this fires, when that emits, I want to call something locally, and then update name is going to call. Hopefully this works the first time. Let's see. Hello, my name is Rob. Please work. It does. Cool. So.
Find out the value in that input. Not going to enter the button. You want it from the outside in theory.
So ask that again.
You want to go the other way. So instead of waiting for the button to be transcribed to tell you an event that occurred, what if at some point the outside world wants to come in and ask, what's the current state of that?
So that's an interesting question, and I'm going to show you now. So nice segue into the next part of this demonstration. Yeah.
We have directives on your MLF. You have name tag and name changer.
Yep.
What if, let's just say they didn't have a relationship with Git, but name tag needed to include name changer. We have to do it here and then another lower level component.
Yes, you do.
Again.
Yes, you do. And that's very much on purpose. And the reason for that is that when we actually do this compilation step, like if you consider that everything now is a component, right? You might have, in a big application with 100 people working on a team or a bunch of open source bootstrap components, right? You might actually end up with 2 components called like ng tabs, right? And unless you're explicit about it, then you don't really know which is which. So that's like the long answer to your question. The short answer is yes, but there is a shortcut. I'm not going to show it to you because I'm not really supposed to show it to you. But there is a way in a large application you can effectively say, like, I want to make this set of directives ambiently available to my entire application. And you can do that. We don't consider it a best practice necessarily, but it's a thing, and you can do it, and inevitably your team will do it. But I'm just warning you today that we don't think it's an awesome idea necessarily. Okay? Clear as mud? Yeah, awesome. But yes, the general theme you're going to see here is that like Angular is more explicit everywhere, right?
I guess my question was, do I have to define it here instead of just the lower level?
Oh, no. So if you only want to use it like inside of the lower level, then absolutely no. You only have to declare it in that one place. And so like if you had like name changer detail, which was part of the name changer component, then yeah, you would only have to have that in the child of that. Good question. What was I doing? Okay, right. So I'm going to come back to my name changer here, and let's do this. I'm going to add the input. So this is that question of like, okay, but I want a component that's doing 2 things, right? It's got input and output to the outside world. So what I'm actually going to do here is input. And so rather than like setting a default, which is kind of boring, right? Like this is a string as well. Remove this one. And so now, like, if I don't pass the value down, this is undefined, right? But what I've got now is an input called name and an output called name change, okay? And so I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to say name, oops. There we go. My name. And we'll just make that a 2-liner so you can see this, what's about to happen. This is going to blow your mind. Ready? Okay, so this is now like it's a regular component, right? It's got an input and an output, okay? Just test this works before we go any further. Hello, my name is Rob. Rob, right? Cool. And if I set a default value here, so like this dot my name is Rob. Should see that, oops, what did I do wrong there? Ha! Yeah. Thank you for that. Good, cool. So I can go in here and say like test changes in both places, right? So again, there's like input and output, right? Okay, but this becomes really like verbose, right? Like, why am I continually doing this all the time, right? This is annoying. So let's do a brief diversion here. And let's talk about ng model for a second, because this is like everybody's favorite thing about Angular, right? And we were like, we're getting rid of ng model. And people were like, you guys were stupid. Yes.
Update name. So if you have the my name equals to name something, then will that create a cycle?
No, actually, good question. So no, it doesn't, because the way that this works is that we update the name, and then we do a change detection pass, and then we go back and do it again. So like, if the question was like, if I said update name here, let me talk about change detection in a second, because like that's a totally different separate point of conversation. But like what I'm about to show you will probably answer your question as to why. Okay. So let's just imagine that we're lazy and we want to use like an input box, right? And so Angular has ng model, and again in Angular 1 it looked like ng model is whatever, right? So in Angular 2, it looks like this. ng model is my name. A little kind of thing to help you remember this, which is ridiculous. We call this the banana in a box syntax, which is pretty amazing, right? So there's a square bracket and a parentheses bracket there, right? So it's like a banana in a box. I don't know. And so this is ng model. It works like exactly like you're used to with Angular 1. So we should see here is like, as I type in this box, Rob, yay, it works, okay? So that's ng model bound to this. That's two-way data binding, as you know and love, okay? Now, here's the thing about banana in a box, right? Banana in a box is 2 things you already know about from today, okay? So it's square brackets and parentheses, okay? So what ngModel actually is a binding called ngModel, like this, and an event called ngModel change, update name, okay? And you would never actually type this in real life, right? But that's what it is. It's two things. It's a property binding and an event firing at the same time. And so here's the awesome thing, right? So, okay, we took the time and we created an input and an output like this. Do the same thing and use the same banana in a box syntax here and get rid of this other event. And so that's our own two-way data binding we just created. Oops, what am I doing? Oh, save, yeah. And changes. Okay. So that's, again, just to show you the longhand, that's like the longhand syntax and the shorthand syntax. ngModel change, thing change. Okay?
I'm not sure how the change, like your event handler for the change of name, knows what your property is called.
So that's a good question. So if we go back to the longhand syntax, you mean like why this is? Like why this becomes this?
No. Why does the name change handler that you got in the parentheses there? Why is it okay that that's not there? You use banana in a box.
Because banana in a box is name plus the string change.
Okay.
So, and that's literally the convention. It's the property name plus change the capital C is, and that's, yeah, like that probably should have explained that a little bit more clearly, right? But yeah, it's the name of the property, and change gives you two-way data binding for free. So you could call it whatever you want, but that's the kind of sugary syntax which will make things work really nicely. And it means that you can write components in such a way that are kind of one-way data flow safe, and if you've done React, you understand one-way data flow, and we'll maybe talk about that in a second. But like it's this idea of like we have inputs and outputs, right? And it enforces this change detection question you asked, right? That like events always go up and properties always go down, right? Except that we know that sucks to have to write everything manually, so we have this sugary syntax which basically kind of does this magical thing for you. Somebody's gonna ask a question, I butted in. No. Nope. This is the cool thing about it. I can take this out. And simply the act of doing banana in a box with the name and the name change coming from the downstairs thing, right? Like that makes it work magically. So effectively, internally to Angular, we're wiring up that syntax to basically do this. Like the longhand syntax looks like, it would be like my name equals, and it's kind of like we're doing that for you, right? Rather than calling a method, we're just like directly doing it in the view, okay? Yeah.
If you have another function that's the same name defined, which one does it execute?
If you have another function with the, like, and you mean another output with the thing defined?
So you have a name change.
Yep.
Defined. The one you get free.
Oh, and so if I do like, go back to it. So just like if I did banana box and then I also had like name change, like that, both of them, right? And so again, like it depends. The first question is like, are they both going to change the same thing, right? And in that case, the this one will execute first, and then like this will execute after. They will both execute, so it behooves you to not like do the same thing with them, right? But I think it's rare that you would have both of these things in use, right? And I think that most of the apps that we built on our team, you kind of end up doing ngModel two-way data binding everything, or like ngModel two-way data binding nothing, basically. But no, but if you fire them both, they will both fire. It's kind of up to you to be conscious of like, maybe I shouldn't also update the property in this one. It is set up in such a way that this property will update first, so that if you wanted to like change something else from this function, you could totally do that, and that's absolutely a totally legit use case. Yes, this one should fire first, and then that one will fire afterwards. Good question. Everybody okay with this so far? I just melted all your brains. Sorry. That's how it goes. My name here. Let's just go back and fix this. So like this is, and I mean, don't want to simplify it because it's not the most simple thing you've ever kind of seen in 15, 20 minutes. But this is like pretty much everything you need to know about Angular 2. Like it's this, if you understand this, or like this even makes kind of basic sense, you can go now read the docs, more sense, because they're much better than I am at explaining this. But like this concept of I have components and they have inputs and they have outputs is like really all you need to know about Angular apps, at least from a UI point of view. Okay?
So with the banana box, you didn't have to create the update name, right?
Correct.
So inside the name changer, do you still have to create that event?
Yes. That is the thing, right? So like the nice thing is it allows you to use a component in such a way that it's either like the event listening way, or if the component author, right, has done the name change thing, then it becomes two-way bindable. And not all components make sense for two-way data binding, right? Like it doesn't make sense of a button that you can two-way data bind on, right? But like anything that's sort of doing inputs and outputs that are effectively describing the same thing, you can do this two-way data binding syntax with. But yes, they do need to follow the convention, and the component that you're listening to does need to declare the input output to the world. Okay?
You put multiple in there, like let's say they change the last name and the first name.
Totally. Yeah, you could just line them up. So I could go in here and do like first name and last name. Yeah, you could absolutely do that and have multiple inputs and multiple outputs. Like a lot of the components that we're building on the material team right now have like 8 or 9. One cool thing about this, and this is something we're going to release in our CLI after ngCon, is that because this, and like a lot of this like weird syntax thing, right? The reason this exists is this allows us to do analysis on your code. This is like a marker for tooling. So it's the kind of thing that if you're a big company and you have like a suite of components, right? And a lot of companies like build their internal UI libraries. You could then very easily run a generator that effectively like generated docs for you that said, look for the input, look for the output, look for the input, and like easily generate API docs for your components, right? This allows some very, very interesting static analysis stuff. It allows Art Type Checker, and I think if I have time, I'll show you a demo of this. But we have like a new syntax coming in, or a new tool coming in, that will actually look at the output here and compare it to where you're using it in your templates and do type checking against your template. So it's like it's going to take your HTML and compare it to your TypeScript and say, hey, actually, you don't have a method called whatever, and actually highlight it here in the TypeScript. I can't make that run on my machine because it's still not released yet. But like it's, I have a little GIF of it actually working. GIF. I have a little animation of it working, and it's really pretty incredible. So is everybody kind of vaguely okay with this concept? I know this is like a lot to swallow in 45 minutes, but yeah.
Can you put input star sort of like
No, good question. So no. One of the things that you will learn is that a lot of the dynamic-y things that you do in Angular 1 apps, right, like they tend to be less allowed. And a lot of that is because we want them to performance, like things that we have to kind of dynamically compute and calculate, like they don't really work the same way. So the star question, though, and that reminds me, I should actually show you the other interesting thing, right? So let's talk real quick about, I don't know, let's do this. So like I've talked here for 40 minutes about components, right? And everybody who's an Angular developer is like, yeah, but I don't build apps with the components because nobody builds entire apps out of components, right? Like a real Angular application done properly has services. All your logic lives in services, right? Yes, this is how you're doing apps today, I hope. Yes, using services, good, cool. So let's build a service just for fun here. I don't know, let's call it like friends. And so what is an Angular service? Yeah, shoot.
Sorry,
That's okay.
I asked a question.
Yes.
For the decorator, is it possible to create?
Yes, it is. You could, and actually a decorator, good question, is literally just a function that looks like this. It's like var component is a function that returns function that returns function and does stuff. Like that's a decorator. That's all it is. So you could, like this is then the class ctor, and then like args. So if I would use this one instead, this is this, and this is this. Yeah. You can certainly, like all kinds of interesting use cases have been discovered for decorators. like Ionic, if you've used Ionic before, they have like a page decorator instead of a component decorator. Obviously, our tooling will only understand our decorators because we write the tooling for both. But you can totally invent all kinds of use cases for decorators. I see you going, like, don't overdo it on decorators though, right? Like, just, you can do it, but don't get crazy with them. That's all I'm saying. Good question though. Okay, so services, right? So you've probably done this, like angular.module, blah. And then you have this like thing of like, okay, do I do factory? Do I do service? Or do I do provider? And like, I will give you $5 if you can come here and like do the provider API from memory, because I can't do it, right? And the other thing is like, okay, when do I use what? Like, what's the thing? Like, what's a factory? What's a provider? Does a factory get invoked once, or does it get invoked every time I inject it? Or right? Ridiculous. Goodbye. Okay. So Angular services, super, super easy, right? So if you've read Todd Motto, anybody know who Todd Motto is? You read his blog, Todd Motto? No? So he wrote this really awesome article that's like, if you're using ES6 like I am doing, you should be using services. And I would say that now the preferred term, and interesting, like we don't actually have a real name for this thing, but it's a service is how you can think about this. So let's say I wanted to have a service that tracked my friends. That's it. Done. Okay. So let's say like in here we could have like a list, which is an array, and then something like, oh, I don't know, add friends, which takes a name, and then like this dot list dot push the name, right? So this is like a kind of a servicey thing that everybody kind of seen before. So I'm gonna do this. So yeah, it's a service. That's it. Like that's all you really need to know. Except, just kidding, right? So this thing where I'm like, it's really easy to declare things, but then there's this like weird, oh my god, but we still call them directives, right? So here you go. We still call them providers. Sorry.
That's awesome.
So a provider, right? Yeah? No, that doesn't exist. That's fine. That's gone, actually. And there's no config, no run, none of that stuff. But like, it's still a provider. It's something that provides functionality to the application. Sorry, I argued against this for like a week. And they were like, no, we're going to call it directives and providers because we're Angular, and this is just like, that's what we do. We name things weird. Sorry. Yeah, that's what I said. You can see, like, on GitHub, you can see me saying, let's just call it a service. Didn't happen. Sorry. So directives and providers, like, the only time you'll ever type them, though, I promise you, is in those two arrays. That's it. What did I call that sound? I called it, like, friends service. And that was in my friends class, right? So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to... So this is interesting. What I've done here is this is kind of like in an Angular 1 app when you do like angular.module.whatever, and you kind of register it with Angular, right? So instead of doing angular.directive.whatever or angular.module.service.whatever, you just give it to Angular, right? Like this is, you provide it to Angular this way. But I want to inject it, right? Like DI, we've all done this before. I want to inject it into my controller, into my class, right? So how do you think I do that? So it could be like, I don't know, you could do something gnarly like this and do like friends service is a function. Like this is awful, right? Terrible. Okay, so this is what is in Angular 2. Really nice and easy. I have a friend service. And I'm using TypeScript, right? So instead of using a string, I can actually just use the class itself. And that's it. Now it's available, it's injectable, and there it exists.
What about I was just using ES6?
We're not going to talk about ES6. So if you were just using ES6, there's two ways you can do an ES6. If you were using the Babel's got a new decorator plugin thing, you can do this. You can do @inject, this thing, friends. Yeah, that's ugly, right? The other thing you can do is, what does it look like? It's like parameters is a function that returns friends service. Still kind of ugly. Just use TypeScript. Like, trust me, just use TypeScript. Just use TypeScript.
Is the service automatically appended, or is that just a thing?
No, you can call it whatever. You can call it like foo if you wanted to. Is it? Good catch. No, I'm an idiot. That's all. Just a typo. That's the thing that TypeScript's supposed to like check for me, and it's not because I'm running the alpha. Oops. Friend service. There we go. So provide the things in, and then like this basically makes it available for injection. And so I could do, here's a nice thing about TypeScript. I could do like, okay, friend service is a type of friend service, right? And then I inject it. And if you've done ES6 Angular 1, you've done this before. It's like this dot friend service. It's a friend service. Like, right? This is terrible. Okay, so no, you don't have to do any of that. Just fix that. And you can literally just do this, say public, and it assigns it automatically. It's just available. Nice and easy. What? What I did what? Good call. Thank you. We'll even shorten it here. Better. Thank you. I would like stare at that for an hour and gone, what? Okay. So let's say that we want to like add a friend with a name, and we're going to actually pass the L through. I'll do like this dot friends dot add a friend, which has the L dot value. And we're going to go up here. We're just going to get rid of all that work that we did because, oops, inputs. That's the friend name. And do that. And then a button. Is click. Now we're going to add our friends and pass you the friend name. Yes, and save. Okay, so ng repeats. Awesome, right? Okay. This one you're really going to dislike for like a day, a week, probably even a month. I still do it wrong every now and then. Okay. So this one's kind of wacky, but here we go. So in Angular 1, this would look like ng repeats friend in, I'm actually going to change this back to friend service, just actually, so it's friends.list, right? So again, that's that property coming from here, list. In Angular 2, it looks like this, ng4 friend. Yeah, I can hear the guy in the back going, what? Friends.list.
Do we still need a track by index?
You can still do track by. Track by still exists. You don't have to. It does reference checking automatically here. You can do track by. I'll show you that in just a second. But no, you don't have to. We still have it. Now, this is weird looking, right? Like this is the thing that makes everybody go, oh my god. And this is why I waited to the end to show you, because I hope like I'd sold it this, and now I'm going to ruin it for you. Okay. This actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Okay. So here's the first thing. This little asterisk here basically tells you as the developer, this directive, and this is a directive now, right? Like it's one of 4 directives, and that's it. This is a directive that's going to modify the DOM. It's going to change this bit of UI, right? And you can actually say this asterisk denotes that this line is a template, right? It's a template that's going to be repeatedly stamped out in the view. The other one, just I'll show it to you because it looks exactly the same. I have a div, and so I told you about hidden, right, and visible and whatever, ng show, ng header gone. But ng if also modifies the DOM, right? Like it's removing elements and inserting elements from the DOM. It's manipulating the DOM. So the asterisk denotes to you this is manipulating the DOM, okay? And then, like this is the only 2 places you'll see it, but here it is. And then if you've done ES6 at all, you actually know that doing, if I have a thing, like of our list of A, B, and C. If I do for let thing in list, a console.log thing, what's that going to log? Anybody? Bonus points? That's actually going to log 0, 1, 2. That's what in loops do. And this is weird because this is not how Angular works, right? Like Angular 1, it's in. Doesn't make sense, okay? In ES6, we have this. And this logs the actual thing that you care about, right? Not the index. And so like we had a big argument about this because we were like, this is really going to piss everybody off. Sorry. But it's actually correct. And if you write ES6, this makes sense. And if you're not an Angular developer, in doesn't make any sense at all because you expect the index to render, right? So sorry, but this is right. So this is the way it is. So it's actually friend of friends. And I guarantee you for the first month you're writing Angular 2, you will do this 10 times a day, and I still do it, and it throws a really wacky error message that we just changed that actually tells you something useful, like, hey, it's actually of, not in, sorry, remember that. But there it is. And again, there's this weird hash thing on the left side, right? And this is var. So it reads almost like the actual JavaScript syntax for a for of loop. Do you buy that?
Yes.
Yeah? Then I've done my job. There we go. Sold. Nice. Cool. So that's an ng4, right? And again, you can do the same thing. So I could actually do, I don't know, like some component. I can ng4 over those because I'm just going to stamp templates out, right? So let's see if we can actually make this work. So we have an input that takes the name. I'm going to pass the value through. We're going to ng4 over the friend list.friends. Let's see. No, it doesn't. Let's see why. Haha, big scary error message. Tuple type element list cannot be empty. Now I got to remember what that TypeScript message means. Okay. Friends in here. Now I've made my screen really huge and I can't work. There we go. Oh, list is an array. Derp. Ooh. Just somebody asked about track by. This is the last thing I'll show you. I'll let you go. So track by, where did my app go? Track by still exists. Looks like this. You do track by. The difference is instead of saying some property, you say some function that would do like some function that takes the index and the elements, and you could return like l.id or whatever, right? By default, Angular 2 uses reference tracking, so if you do immutable stuff, if you do like kind of handles it really nicely automatically, but you can opt into using the sum function syntax. Typically, you will not generally need it until you get to big, really kind of gnarly lists, but it exists, it's there, it does make a difference in certain cases. Yeah, like I've yelled at you for an hour, so there you go. That's probably about it. Are there questions you would like to ask? Like, who wants to go use React now? Nobody. It's okay. Yeah. What was that again? What is it? Yeah. Okay. So, and I'll type this out again because I like typing this out. For let friend of friends. So you can actually literally track those across. So like for that hash effectively means var or let that to that. So you can actually do this if you prefer, right? So var friend, the hash basically says declare a variable here. And it's the same thing that I'm doing here, which is to declare a variable and assign it to the input. Make sense? So yeah, like that's why that syntax exists. Other questions? Yeah, you go first.
Where are you importing ng4?
Good question. So ng4, you know that thing somebody asked at the very beginning of this, like, do I have to import all those things all the time? And I was like, there's this super secret thing that you're not supposed to do. That's what we're doing with ng4. So like the first few alphas of Angular 1 or Angular 2, we actually made you import it every single time, which was really, really made people mad. So we took that out. We have this thing called ambient directives. And you can Google that, and people have already written about it and whatever. But we ambient include ng4 across the entire application, ng4, ngif. There's like 2 more that I can't remember right now, and they're kind of globally available.
Is that the core directive stuff?
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. So yes, they're kind of globally available to the application, and you can extend that core directives array with your own stuff if you want to. Shh, don't do it, but you can.
How do you reference the array index? Are there still all the $signs?
Yeah, good question. So it looks, you're gonna make me forget this, but it looks something like idx equals I. It's something like that, and I haven't. Sorry, I should really know that, but it looks something like that. It's documented. But yeah, it's the same like. Again, which almost reads like a for loop, right? Like it's quote, 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 or semicolon, semicolon, semicolon. But yeah, there is the same thing. You can still do index. You can still do track by. The one thing that disappears that everybody hates is ng options. Like, who can do ng options from memory? Nobody. That's gone. You can just do ng4, and that works fine. So that's gone. But yeah, index still exists, to answer your question shortly. You had a question? You're good.
I've seen another syntax where instead of a separate input decorator, I've seen it as part of the
yes.
decorator. Is that like a...
So it looks like this, something like name.
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, the short answer to this is fine. This is like how you do it in ES5 where you don't have decorators, or ES6 where you don't have decorators. I would say to you, though, if you're in TypeScript, use the decorator syntax because it allows us, again, to do analysis on your code. We can't do analysis with this. We can do analysis with the decorators. So yeah, and I probably should at the very beginning of all this said that I'm using TypeScript here, but if you want to use ES5 or Dart, if anybody here wants to use Dart, you can. ES5 or Dart or ES6, like, we are not really opinionated on that, but we really like TypeScript. All our tooling revolves around TypeScript. We think it's the best way to write Angular applications. And secret, you will get the smallest application at the end result using TypeScript because, again, we can understand your code better than we can in any other kind of syntax, which means we can shake out dead code, we can eliminate stuff, we can do all kinds of clever things that we can't do with languages we can't statically analyze. So use TypeScript if you're going to use Angular 2. What happens to the link method in direct? Good question. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. The longer answer to that question is that if you wanted to, so if you want to do like a directive that does, I don't know, like a hookup to a jQuery element or something, right? Instead of having, it looks like this. I'll just do one for you that's not going to work, but here we go. So if I have a directive, and I don't know, we want to do like selector, like date picker, let's say, because everybody hates making date pickers. You just pull one off the shelf, right? So what I don't have here is a template, right? And so I would do something like input, and I would say date picker. And obviously to do this, like, I need to get a reference to the element, right? Like, that's what you do with link. You kind of wire these things together. So I do like date picker. And so because we're using DI, like the same way you do it in an Angular directive or like an Angular 1 directive, we can do this. I'll probably get this wrong the first time. Constructor L is element ref. So effectively, then I can do this, and this gives me that ability to do like the linking up between the two things, right? So I can inject the element, and then I can add my event listeners or all that shenanigan stuff that you really want to do with your jQuery stuff. You can do it this way. And so effectively, constructor becomes your kind of link method. We do have, and I always forget to mention these, but we do have lifecycle events, which if you're a React dev, you know about these. So we've got like ng on init and ng on destroy. And there's a few more like ng on changes. So these are like lifecycle methods, which are standard. And if you declare them this way, then Angular will fire them for you at points in your component's lifecycle. So when it's created and when it's destroyed and when there's a change detection loop. So you get all these little hooks to learn what Angular is doing around your stuff. There's one called like ng after view init, which is really useful for when you have like some DOM element that you then want to link up to. You can listen for that ng after view init method and then fire stuff on there to wire up like your link stuff. And there's a really good section on the docs called like, I don't know what it's called, but it talks about like, this is how I did in Angular 1, how do I do it in Angular 2, right? Like, this is the thing I want to do, how do I do it in Angular 2? We have a really nice comparison kind of A to B on how to do these things. Cool.
These also find this is sort of like mentor.
Yeah, so let me show you that actually. Let me see if I can track down the issue. Microsoft. Here I'm Googling Microsoft on the stage in a Google event. Microsoft TypeScript extensibility. So this blew my mind the first time I saw it. So we actually have a guy who works on the Angular team who used to work for Microsoft on the TypeScript team, which is awesome. So we are building this thing. And so if you can see this, what this is doing is that's template strings like I've been doing in my demo all day today, but A, there's syntax highlighted, but also it's doing autocomplete based off of information in the class. And it's also doing type checking against the class, right? So we're type checking your HTML against your controller. which if you're an Angular 1 developer, is like that would never happen, right? It's unheard of. And it'll tell you like it's not the right type, or it's not the right syntax, or this doesn't exist. You get auto completion. Like this is incredible, and this I've seen in real life. It actually works. It's a thing, and we want to have it ready to go to ngconf, but I'm not sure that it will be. But it's like right on the edge of the horizon. It's going to make my job at these talks way easier because it's like going to stop me from making stupid errors. But yeah, we do this. Minko, if you've looked at mgechev on GitHub, like he has a new like style guide linter. Like there's some really clever people building stuff on top of this already. That all does TypeScript analysis and all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah.
And it seems like the two best editors to use are Visual Studio Code and WebStorm.
I would agree with that.
Yep.
Yep. We like Visual Studio Code just because like half the team uses VSE and the other half uses WebStorm. The poor people that have to write Dart, I'll use WebStorm because that doesn't work on any other editor. But yeah, those two are really good. Atom's got a really good TypeScript plugin. Atom's really good. We have a couple really masochists who like to use Vim for this, which is go for it. But yeah, you can do it if you want. I wouldn't ever, but you can. Yeah, but I would say VSC and WebStorm are probably the two best editors. Oh, and let me show you this because I haven't gotten to talk about this on stage at all. So here's a really dirty secret that like I've been doing these demos for like 3 months and I've never. Oops, let's undo this. So I don't actually ever talk about this, but the one thing if you read about Angular 2, you've heard anything? Oh crap. Let's go fix this. You can see that. So right now. And I've been like hovering over this and not really showing it to you, right? So this bundle that I've been building right now has 4.2 megs, which is huge, right? Like you read Hacker News or Reddit, people are like, oh my God, Angular 2 is huge, right? Like you got 750K, how are you gonna write an app like this? React is tiny, right? So we've been working really hard, like quietly in our lab, that we want to make sure that when you actually ship an application that is not 4 megs, right? Which is terrible. So I built a demo with a stuff that we just landed this weekend, and I just want to show you this because this like blew my mind, and I haven't gotten to show anybody yet, so you get the first people to see it. So again, like that thing was what 4 megs for effectively like hello world application, right? Anybody know how big Angular 2 or Angular 1 is gzipped? No, because who would know that other than people who work like on the team or nerds about this? Angular 1 gzipped is 53K. Okay. So Angular 2, like, publicly has been like 700, 800K. This is a hello world app in Angular 2, 45K gzipped, 218K minified. So that's smaller than Angular 1, like, in itself. And so this lands in the next beta of Angular 2, and now go off and use it because it's tiny and awesome and very, very fast. So any other questions?
I'm not really an expert on this, but I assume that like QA binding might be a little challenging or strategies for updating the DOM, shadow DOM and stuff. So, I'm only just somewhat familiar with these terms I'm throwing out, but I have a working knowledge of the digest cycle. So I'm just wondering if there's anything you might share with us.
Sure, that's a really good question.
Digest and shadow DOM and what things.
So an Angular 1 application, the way that the digest cycle works is that you do a change, and then Angular repeatedly runs the digest cycle until it goes to stable, right? And so have you ever gotten that really scary error that's like infinite digest cycles reached or whatever? It's because your application has a cycle, right? It's doing something that's changing something that's changing something else, and like Angular just goes into a crazy loop, and at 10 it says, and it explodes, okay? So Angular 2, from scratch, was built to solve that problem. And Angular 2's change detection now goes from top to bottom. So it starts at the root application and walks all the way down, and only runs once. And that's it. And you can break it. Like there are some ways that you can do silly things and you can break it, but we will immediately throw an error at you that says, hey, you're doing it wrong. Stop doing that. And somebody asked this question earlier about like how do we not cause cycles, right? And it's this thing that the output is actually an event that we fire to the top, and we run a change detection loop from the top to the bottom. And then the way we do the ng model syntax binding is written by people who are way cleverer than me, right? But effectively, it's doing that under the hood, where it's making the change and then running change detection top to bottom again. So I don't want to say it's impossible because someone will call me out on that, but it's very, very difficult to cause a cycle in an Angular application. And if you do, we have what we call a dev mode that actually runs when you're developing, that will run change detection once and then immediately run it again. And if it does a comparison, it sees that something has changed in that loop. That means obviously your change detection has caused a side effect, and it will prevent that. And it will explode and say, hey, this changed, that shouldn't happen. You're doing something wrong. So we make it really difficult to do it wrong generally in Angular 2. And like it's obscenely faster. Like I can't even quote you a number, but it's way, way faster. So that's good. Gone. Yep. Forever. Gone. And that's, again, that's on purpose because, like, in certain cases it makes it nice, right? But, like, inevitably in a large enough application, it turns to hell, right? Because you lose track of things. And so we have this very, very explicit input-output syntax to do that. Any other questions? No? Cool. Good. Thanks for coming, y'all. Much appreciated. So again, I'm at Rob Rollman on Twitter. It's my job to talk to people about this stuff. So if you have questions or whatever, then please do send me a tweet. I'm happy to answer it. If you have your boss wants to talk about it, then that's my job too. So like, you can send your boss to me. It's Rob Wormald. I should probably put that up on screen. Twitter.com/me. Get my follower count up. Yep, that's me there. Oops. I'm not that smiley in real life, generally. There you go, Rob Wormald, that's me. And this is me quoting, my last tweet was the same thing, like, hey, look how tiny Angular 2 is, yay. Yeah, so do fire me questions if you want. I'll probably hang around for a while because I'm just going to go to a hotel and sit and write Angular code. So if you want to come talk to me about it, then I'll be here for a little while. Cool. Thanks for coming, I'll much appreciate it. And thanks you for AngularJS OC for having me. Cool.